Welcome to Mild Moodcast, a podcast meant to explore mental health through the lens of another human hanging on by a thread. I'm Bianca, a registered mental health counselor intern, soon to be LMHC, here to chat about the topics we don't get enough of. So grab your headphones and let's dive into the crazy world of mental health. It's going to be a wild ride. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mild Moodcast. Happy Sunday, or whatever day it is that you're listening to this. Today's topic is going to be, I guess, a bit of a heavy one. And as you can see by the title, it's called Even When You Get It. I want to talk about something that, honestly, I hear a lot in sessions of my clients. I hear a lot with people that I talk to. I see a lot on social media. And it's something that nobody really prepares you for. What it's like when your emotions are dismissed by the people you love the most. Not strangers, not acquaintances. People whose opinions matter, and worse, how it feels when it happens, even though you understand them, even though you get it. This episode is for people who feel everything, who think deeply, and still end up hurt because they can pretend it didn't matter, but it did. It's for the people who try to be understanding, fair, they hold space for everybody else's pain, and who are now left wondering where they fit in their own story. But before we dive in, let's do my disclaimer. As always, while my podcast is meant to spark reflection and curiosity, it is not a replacement for therapy. If you're navigating heavy emotions or challenges, please reach out to a professional. Therapy is a safe space to process and grow. So first I want to talk about emotional dismissal by loved ones and why that cuts so deep. Starting here because this is where the wound begins. There's a difference between disagreement and dismissal. Someone disagreeing with your feelings might say something like, "I didn't see it that way." Someone who is dismissing your feelings might say, "You're overreacting. You're always so sensitive." Or even worse, "That's not what happened." Dismissal doesn't just invalidate what you're feeling. It chips away at your sense of reality. And when it comes from a parent, a partner, or a close friend, it hits in a way that can't be resonated. It hits in a way that can't be reasoned away. Because this is someone who's supposed to know you, someone who claims to love you. And suddenly, you're left wondering if they ever really did. And what's crazy is it's subtle at first. You vent about a hard day, and they tell you, "Well, it could be worse." You finally open up about something vulnerable, and they say, "You're being dramatic." Or you're met with just complete silence. Eye rolls, shrugs, maybe even laughter. These are the tiny fractures that become cracks in your foundation. Over time, you stop sharing. You stop trusting your emotional cues. You wonder if you really are too much, or too needy, or too fragile. You start editing your own experiences before they're even fully felt. Especially if you grew up in a household where your emotions were regularly minimized, you start believing the script. I'm only lovable when I'm easy to deal with. I'm only valuable when I'm calm, collected, and convenient. Or, when I heard this week, I'm only lovable when I'm high performing. There's no room for feeling here. There are so many ways emotional dismissal shows up. Maybe someone close to you only listens when you're falling apart. Never when you're quietly struggling. Maybe you learned to joke about your pain because anytime you were serious, no one took you seriously. Or maybe you were taught that expressing hurt means being weak, dramatic, or selfish. So you learn to repress it instead of express it. And then you become an adult. You think, well, now, having grown up relationships, I'll be seen. You think that love means you'll finally be heard. But then it happens again. You express a boundary or an insecurity, and someone tells you you're making a big deal out of nothing. You cry, and they walk out of the room. You open up, and they change the subject. You ask for reassurance, and they say, you should know how I feel. And there it is again. The wound. Not just the pain of feeling dismissed, but the ache of recognizing it. You get it. You know this person has their own trauma, their own blocks, their own limitations. But knowing why someone hurts you doesn't make the hurt disappear. In fact, sometimes it makes it harder. Because now you're sitting in two truths at once. I understand why you are the way you are, and I'm still hurt by it. That's what we're going to explore in this episode. The very in-between space. The ache of being emotionally intelligent enough to get it and human enough to still feel the sting. I want to talk about the parent and partner wounds that overlap. Sometimes we end up in relationships that feel strangely familiar, and not just emotionally, but energetically. Like you've been there before, even if the face is different. And a lot of people don't pick up on this one, at least not right away. Often that familiarity comes from the emotional blueprint we grew up with. It's not just that our partner reminds us of our parent. And again, some people don't even realize that. If anything, you think you'd be the person that you would choose would be the least likely to be close to your parent, to be anything like that person. Maybe you told yourself, I'll never date someone like them. And in reality, you do. Our nervous system has been conditioned to recognize certain dynamics as home, even when home was chaotic, neglectful, emotionally unpredictable. When a parent ignored your emotions, made you feel like your sadness was too much, or constantly made you earn affection, you may unknowingly start seeking out these same emotional patterns in adult relationships. It doesn't mean you consciously want that. It means that your body learned to survive those dynamics, and now it's operating on autopilot. This is super true if you've never had the chance to fully process or grieve your unmet needs. It's the partner who tunes out when you cry. And instead of walking away, you lean in harder. You try to explain yourself better. It's the friend who doesn't ask how you are unless you're doing something for them. And instead of setting a boundary, you try to become more useful. It's the feeling of being pulled to prove your worth over and over again. Because deep down, you're still trying to earn the love that was supposed to be unconditional. And let's be real, it's not easy to walk away from something that mirrors the love you've always longed to make right. I can't tell you how many clients I've had that I've said, you keep this one because even though it's like your parent, maybe they'll do it right this time. It feels better because at least this one feels like love. You stay because a part of you is hoping that this time it'll turn out differently. That if you're good enough, patient enough, loving enough, the ending will be rewritten. And maybe this person will love you in all the ways your parent never could. But here's where it gets heavy. When you're trying to heal your inner child through someone else's behavior, you end up outsourcing your power. You make your healing dependent on their growth. And when they don't grow, because they don't, you shrink yourself, trying to make the pain hurt less. And that's not to say that people won't grow, but just in these instances, before you're at a point of healing, when you're in the thick of it with these partners that you've chosen that have the same mannerisms, the same words, the same behaviors as your parents, they're not growing. We don't always stay because we don't know better. Sometimes we stay because we're desperate for the original wound to finally be seen. The partner becomes a stand-in for the parent who never said, "I'm sorry." And if they do apologize, even once, it feels like a lifeline. But that lifeline isn't always safe to hold on to. Understanding this pattern is the first step to breaking it. It's not your fault that your nervous system has associated love with inconsistency, abandonment, or being too much. But it is your responsibility to choose differently once you see it. And you might hear that and think, okay, but how do I actually do that? And we'll get there. But the first step is naming it without shame. And really heavy on naming it without shame, because I have clients who can name this, but they can't name it without shame. They can't name it without judgment. They can't name it without something immediately coming up and pressuring their speech right behind these words. You're not broken for craving love the only way you were ever shown it. You were surviving. And the difference now is you're learning how to live. I ask people all the time, do you want to continue living in survival mode? Because shit, I don't. And their answer is always no, I really don't. I don't want to live in survival mode anymore. Right. So meeting yourself without the shame, without the judgment, that's step one. This is the part that really messes with your head. When you understand why someone is the way they are, when you see their pain, their trauma, their upbringing, when you know they were never taught to hold space for emotions, when you can literally trace the roots of their avoidance, their temper, their silence, and still, it hurts. That's the piece people often leave out in healing conversations. Understanding someone's pain doesn't erase the pain they caused you. It doesn't cancel out the nights you cried, the loneliness you felt while sitting next to them, or even the ways you started second-guessing your reality just to keep the peace. Empathy is powerful, but it can also be a trap. Because when you get it, when you really get it, you start to carry their pain and yours. And if you've always been, the emotionally aware one, the fixer, the feeler, the person who notices what isn't being said, it becomes second nature to over-explain your feelings while protecting theirs. You shrink the truth to make it more digestible for someone who never learned how to sit with discomfort. And tell me if some of these sound familiar. You say things like, I know they didn't mean it like that. I know their childhood was rough. I know they don't know how to express themselves. Because if I had $1 for every time I heard those. And all of that may be true. But it's also true that what they did or didn't do still landed. still hurt, still left an imprint. Those 3 different sentences allow you to shrink in those moments, allow you to make it digestible. You're excusing their behavior because they didn't know better. There's this dangerous myth that if you understand someone's trauma, you no longer have the right to be hurt by them. But that's not healing. That's martyrdom. And emotional intelligence doesn't mean suppressing your truth. It means holding space for duality. The capacity to see why someone is the way they are, while still acknowledging that your pain is valid and deserves to be honored. You can have compassion and boundaries. You can say, I know where this comes from, and still say, I deserve better than this. You can recognize their emotional limitations without making them your emotional prison. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. And that comes from the parents, the partners who told you that you were too much, who told you there was no room for your emotion, and simultaneously told you to watch out for theirs. Well, you hurt my feelings, but when you tell them that they hurt yours, they never heard you. They never cared. It was never important. So you've been hardwired to listen to what they need and talk yourself out of what you feel. And I think that's where so many people get stuck, in that loop of trying to be so understanding that they forget to be understanding toward themselves. So let's talk about that next. What happens when empathy goes too far, and why it's not always a superpower? Let's go ahead and name something that a lot of people don't want to admit. Being empathetic without boundaries isn't noble. It's exhausting. It can look like love, like understanding, like being the bigger person, but deep down, it's often just self-abandonment in disguise. There's this idea that if you can hold space for someone's pain, you should. That if you see their inner child, you're responsible for nurturing them. That if you understand where someone's coming from, you're obligated to stay. And I just want to be the first one to tell you that that's bullshit. Now, little disclaimer here, because I'm not saying that we can't hold space for someone else's pain. No, there are instances where, yeah, you should. But when it's a detriment to yourself, when you can't agree that someone hurt you, or you can't create a boundary after pain because you're holding space for someone else, it's bullshit. Empathy without limits doesn't make you a healer. It makes you a container for someone else's unprocessed emotions. And eventually, that container overflows. You end up excusing behavior you'd never tolerate from anyone else. You stay too long, give too much, rationalize. You think things like, they're trying, or they don't mean to hurt me, or worse, I can handle it. And maybe you can handle it, but the real question is, should you have to? There's a subtle but painful cycle that happens when you lean too far into empathy. You begin to believe that if you just love them hard enough, consistently enough, gently enough, they'll change. You think, maybe if I show them what it feels like to be held, they'll learn how to hold me too. That one sound familiar? Let me try to show them what I need. Let me try to tell them how to love me. But more often than not, you just keep pouring into someone who doesn't have the capacity or desire to pour back. And I know that this episode does not fucking feel good. I know it doesn't. Especially when I said the words or the desire. Because maybe your internal voice just tried to tell you that you weren't good enough. But this isn't about you. This is about what you tolerate that feeds the idea that you aren't enough. And here's the kicker. Sometimes it's not because they're evil or malicious or heartless. And notice I said sometimes, because sometimes they fucking are. Sometimes it's simply because they haven't done their own work. They don't have the tools, the self-awareness, or the willingness to meet you where you are emotionally. And if you're always coming down to their level, you end up abandoning yourself. Empathy without boundaries teaches you to tolerate the very things that once broke you. And I'm going to say that again. Empathy without boundaries teaches you to tolerate the things that broke you. It's like this quiet, slow erosion of what you need. You shrink your voice. You minimize your hurt. You convince yourself that understanding is more important than being understood. But it's not. Empathy should never require you to disappear. And guess what? True empathy doesn't. You deserve relationships, whether they be romantic, familial, platonic, where compassion flows both ways, where you're not constantly translating your emotions into digestible pieces, where you don't have to brace yourself for being too much or not enough. The truth is, if your empathy is causing you to betray yourself, it's no longer a gift. It is a wound disguised as wisdom. So the real work becomes not just feeling for others, but remembering to feel for yourself too. And that's what leads us into the next piece. The responsibility to grow, even if no one ever taught you how. There's like a deeply frustrating point in the healing journey where you realize that understanding why someone hurt you doesn't make the pain go away. And even worse, it doesn't stop you from continuing the pattern. I remember in another one of my episodes, I think it was specific to men, where you'll hear people say, I want to be nothing like my father. And then they grow up and they're exactly like their father. And it's not just a men thing. It's an everyone thing. This is the part that nobody talks about. The moment you're sitting there with the mess they made inside you, and even though you know they didn't teach you how to do better, how to communicate, how to self-soothe, to trust, you still have to figure it out. You. That's what emotional responsibility looks like. Not perfection. Not suddenly knowing what to do. But being willing to pause and say, okay, this hurts. It's mine now. And I can't keep bleeding on people who didn't cut me. I'm sure you've heard that before because people will say until you fix your wounds, you will bleed on the people who didn't cut you. It's not about blaming yourself. It's about choosing to stop the cycle, even if you're limping while you do it. And that's hard, especially when your trauma was inherited. When the behaviors you're trying to unlearn are the ones you were raised around. Maybe yelling was normal. Maybe shutting down was the only option you had. Maybe love always came with strings or punishments. Boundaries were never modeled. You just got punishments or guilt. So now, when you try to show up differently, you don't feel like yourself. You feel like a fraud. Or you second guess your right to speak up at all. And that's normal. I think right now, too, someone telling their parent that they were depressed, and the parent going, "You better depress these dishes." Maybe you did try. Maybe you spent so many instances, even in small ways, trying to reach out and being rejected. Healing is always, 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 always going to feel unnatural at first. Uncomfortable as fuck. And I try to tell my clients this all the time. If you're uncomfortable, you're doing it right. Not because it's wrong, but because it's new. And you can't wait for someone else to show you the way if you're already standing at the fork in the road. It is up to you to decide which path you're going to take. Even if you've never seen anyone walk it before. Especially if you've never seen anyone walk it before. You get to be the first one. You get to be the pattern breaker. And even though that doesn't come with applause or instant reward, it does come with something so much deeper. Integrity. The kind that says, I might not have had a perfect example, but I refuse to pass this down. I will not become someone else's wounds just because I didn't know better. I will learn better. That's that choice. A lot of times we feel helpless. But in reality, we have a choice to say, I will learn better and do just that. You're allowed to be angry that no one helped you when you needed it most. But you're also allowed to be proud that you're doing something about it now. Being the first in your family or relationship to heal is never easy. But it's sacred work. And you're doing it even if no one ever taught you how. And I just want to say that yes, you are very likely to experience pushback by family. You ever noticed you work on something and suddenly you start to notice it around you, so it's harder to be around those people who do that very thing? Or you speak in a different way that they're not used to hearing. And what do? They give you pushback. I would encourage you to take that as your win in those moments, that you are better, that you are doing differently, that you are stopping that pattern. Often people will say, oh no, I'm uncomfortable. I've made the people around me uncomfortable because you're used to shrinking for their benefit. Don't. Remind yourself that the discomfort that you're feeling in this moment, in that moment, wherever it happens, means it's working. They're not the ones who are doing the work. You are. And the way it makes you feel to speak up for yourself matters. Let's talk about validating your own pain. There comes a moment when you realize you might never get the apology that you deserve. Not because it isn't warranted, but because the person who hurt you either can't or won't own what they did. And for a while, realizing that hurts a lot worse than the actual wound itself. Because how do you begin to move forward when no one else seems to acknowledge that you were wronged at all? That's where self-validation enters. And this is kind of piggybacking off of what I'm saying of feeling better about the fact that even if you're the only one who sees it, or you're the only one that gets to enjoy the fact that you spoke differently. We have to validate ourselves, and not in the cheesy self-help book kind of way, but in the raw, quiet decision to stop begging for your pain to be seen. It's when you sit with what happened and finally say to yourself, that was unfair. That did hurt. And I didn't deserve it. And not in a whisper, but with your full chest. Even if no one ever echoes it back. It's such a powerful shift because that means you're no longer waiting on someone else's awareness to feel whole. You're not putting your healing in the hands of someone who dropped it in the first place. You're giving yourself the dignity of being witnessed, even if you're the only witness there is. Mind you, the most important. And no, that doesn't mean you're excusing what happened. Self-validation isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about recognizing that what you felt mattered, even if the person who caused the pain is still pretending it didn't. It's not about playing the victim. It's about honoring the version of you who had to live through something that changed you. If it helps, you can even write a letter from the version of the person you wish had seen you. A letter that says, I'm sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I laughed when you cried. I'm sorry I acted like your emotions were too much. Not because you need to send it, but because sometimes the validation we're craving is the one we're most capable of giving. Sometimes I tell my clients to think of what part of them is coming up in that moment. Sometimes it's them when they're 6 or 16. And I say, think of this scenario. Pretend that you're either sitting side by side or forehead to forehead. What did that version of you need to hear in that moment? What do they need to hear right now as they sit here with you? And this is essentially the letter version of that. And even if that helps you, close your eyes, envision the part of you that's wounded. Maybe you were 9, maybe you were 10, maybe you were 13, 17, 22. Sit with that version of you and tell them what they need to hear, what you wanted to hear in that moment, and give it to yourself. It's from that place that you get to build trust with yourself again. You get to be the one who listens when you speak. You get to be the one who offers softness instead of shame. You get to be the person you needed when the pain first began. That is self-validation. And it's not just healing. It's freedom. I want to talk about something else that's pretty hard to come to terms with, especially for those of us who were raised to respect our elders or who grew up believing that love means sacrifice. It's titles like mom, dad, sibling, partner, best friend don't come with a lifetime immunity card. And yet, for so long, we treat these titles like they're sacred. Like having a role in your life somehow means they get to keep access to you no matter how they treat you. But love doesn't mean enabling. And family doesn't mean forfeit. You are not obligated to stay in spaces that repeatedly harm you just because there's blood, vows, or history involved. And hear me when I say that. This is the part that no one wants to say out loud. Some people do, but most people don't want to say out loud because it's uncomfortable. It's messy. It's not what the movies taught us. It's not what our families taught us. Still, When you've outgrown dynamics that no longer honor who you are, you start to realize I love you and I need distance can exist in the same breath. You can hold gratitude for the good memories and still draw a boundary. You can recognize their limitations and still protect yourself from being hurt again. That doesn't make you cold. It means you've developed the capacity to hold nuance. Of course, it's not easy. The guilt that comes with creating spaces from people you still care about can be excruciating. I need to take space from this person who has always meant so much to me. You're going to question if you're overreacting. You're going to wonder if you're abandoning them the way you felt abandoned. But that guilt, that's old residue of old conditioning that told you that being loyal meant self-sacrificing, that staying quiet was noble, that being hurt but remaining close was somehow stronger than choosing yourself. Boundaries are not betrayals, and titles aren't proof of safety. Just because someone has a certain role in your life doesn't mean they've earned the right to keep it indefinitely. Relationships are sustained by mutual respect. And I know you know that. They are sustained by mutual respect, not just shared DNA or a label. So yeah, you're allowed to take a step back from your mother if she continues to belittle you. You're allowed to redefine your relationship with your partner if they weaponize your emotions. You're allowed to stop answering the phone for people who only call you when they want something. None of that means you don't care. It means you're finally caring for yourself too. There's a silent expectation that once you decide to set boundaries or protect your peace, you're going to feel better. Like finally making the choice will be empowering and clean. But in reality, sometimes it just feels wrong. And kind of going back to the not because it is, but because it's unfamiliar. Protecting yourself can and almost always will feel like guilt at first, like grief, like second guessing every move, especially when the people you're protecting yourself from are the very people you once leaned on. It doesn't feel strong at first. It feels selfish. It feels cold, like you're abandoning someone, when really you're just returning to yourself. No one talks enough about the ache that comes with choosing peace, because peace doesn't always come wrapped in joy. Sometimes peace is quiet, isolating, and filled with echoes of what if. What if I had tried harder? What if they change after I leave? What if I misunderstood them? These questions don't mean you made the wrong choice. They mean you cared. And when you care deeply, walking away from the versions of people you hoped they'd become is gut-wrenching. You know, I say if I'm anything, I'm honest, and a huge part of me going so in-depth with this topic today is because you deserve to see all sides of it. I'm not going to pretend like when you make a decision like this, it's going to be sunshine and rainbows, because that would be a fucking lie. But the truth is, hoping someone will eventually love you the right way doesn't make the hurt they've caused you any less real. And at some point, you stop asking how much more you can take. And you start asking, what parts of yourself are you sacrificing to stay? You know, protecting yourself is a radical act of trust. It's believing that even though it hurts now, you're building a safer future inside yourself. One where you're no longer staying in places out of obligation. One where your nervous system doesn't have to brace for disappointment. Where you're no longer performing emotional CPR on relationships that flatlined a long fucking time ago. And it's okay if it doesn't feel good at first. Most things that are worth it don't. And if you feel grief surfacing as you set boundaries, that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means you're finally acknowledging the gap between what you needed and what you received. That's not weakness. That's healing. Before we close out, I just want to take a moment and invite you to check in with your body. Maybe this episode felt heavier than you expected. Maybe you were ready for it, but it still brought up more than you thought it would. That's okay. You don't have to power through. You don't have to perform strength. And you definitely don't have to rush to reframe what hurts. There's no pressure to find the lesson in it right now. Just notice what's there. If your chest feels tight, if your stomach's in knots, if your jaw is clenched, give yourself permission to loosen your grip. Take a breath. Stand up. Shake out your hands. Listen to a song that grounds you. Write something down that you're not ready to say out loud yet. Scream into a pillow. Sit in silence. Whatever comes up for you, it deserves space. And you deserve to feel safe as you move through it. You can pause. You can come back. Take care of yourself in whatever way you need to. I want to close this out by reminding you of something I've had to remind myself again and again. Even when you understand them, even when you get it, your pain still matters. You're allowed to hold compassion for someone else and still say, that wasn't okay. You're allowed to understand someone's past and still draw a boundary in the present. You are allowed to walk away from what hurts, even if you love them. Sometimes the hardest part of healing is realizing that knowledge doesn't always equal relief. Just because you've analyzed it, forgiven it, or explained it 1,000 ways doesn't mean your nervous system has caught up yet. That's okay. You're not behind. You're becoming. You're learning how to tell the truth to yourself, even when it's messy. How to validate your experience, even when others won't. You're learning that boundaries aren't walls. They are doors you open inward. So here's an affirmation in case you need it. I can hold space for others without abandoning myself. I can understand without excusing. I can choose peace even when it hurts. I honor what I've been through, and I give myself permission to heal on my own terms. You don't have to harden to be strong. You don't have to stay silent to be kind, and you don't have to carry everything alone. If you made it this far, I just want to say thanks for sitting with me through this one. And I hope that you take gentle care of yourself this week. Bye, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Mild Moodcast. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. If you have any burning questions or topics you'd like me to cover, don't hesitate to reach out. You can find me on YouTube at Mild Moodcast. and Instagram at Mild Mood Therapy. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to explore the wonderful world of mental health together. Until next time, stay curious and keep smiling.